They thought humans were dangerous, until they met the Australian who shrugged off poison, cold, toxic air and scared the predators. I have been working at the Galactic Academy orbital station for approximately 14 cycles now, and in that time I have processed the arrival of over 3,000 students from 247 different species. I am Vextel's Senior Administrator of Student Integration, and I pride myself on being thoroughly, completely and utterly prepared for anything. I have handled methane breathers, silicon-based life forms, students who communicate through bioluminescent pulses, and even that one kid who was technically a hive mind of 17 smaller organisms pretending to be one person. Nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, surprises me anymore. Or so I thought, until the day I received the notification about our first human exchange student. The message arrived on a completely ordinary morning, third rotation, just as I was enjoying my nutrient paste, which tastes exactly like sadness mixed with bureaucracy, but that is beside the point. The file downloaded onto my data slate, and I scanned through it with the kind of casual disinterest that comes from reading thousands of identical forms. Species, human, planet of origin, Earth, solar system, some backwater area near the outer rim that nobody really pays attention to. Recently achieved faster than light capability, so they qualified for the student exchange program. Standard stuff. Really. Name, Flynn O'Reilly, region of origin Australia. Now here is where things get interesting, or rather where I should have paid more attention. See, the file had a little note attached from the Terran Education Liaison, and it said, and I quote, "Please note, student is from Australian region. Cultural differences may apply, recommend extra patience." At the time I figured this was just typical human overcaution. They are a new species to the galactic community, probably worried about making a good impression. How different could one region of their planet be from another? Spoiler alert. Very different. Extremely different. Horrifyingly different. Flynn arrived on the morning transport from the Sol system, and I went to meet him at Docking Bay 7 with my standard welcome package and my standard welcoming smile, which I have been told looks pleasant on most species, but apparently terrifies the Glorbaxians. But they are terrified of everything, so that hardly counts. The airlock cycled open, and out stepped this human wearing what I would later learn was called a tank top and board shorts, which seemed wildly inappropriate for a space station maintained at a carefully controlled temperature of 15 degrees Celsius. He was tall, probably around 1.8 meters, with sun-bleached hair that stuck up in 17 different directions and skin that had been turned a golden brown by what must have been excessive solar radiation exposure. He carried a single bag that looked like it had been through a war, covered in patches and stickers with phrases I did not understand, like "no worries mate" and "yeah nah." "G'day," he said, and his voice was loud, cheerful and had this accent that made every word sound like it was sliding sideways out of his mouth. "You must be Vextel, yeah? Pleasure to meet you, mate." He stuck out his hand, and I stared at it, because while I had read about the human custom of handshaking, which involves gripping each other's manipulator appendages and moving them up and down in a gesture of goodwill that seems mildly threatening if you really think about it, I was not quite prepared for the enthusiasm. I extended my primary manipulator, and he grabbed it and shook it so vigorously that my vision receptors rattled. "Welcome to the Galactic Academy orbital station," I managed to say, trying to maintain my professional composure while my arm was being subjected to what felt like a minor earthquake. "I trust your journey from Earth was pleasant?" "Yeah, nah, it was alright," Flynn said, which I would come to learn is Australian for "it was fine, but I am going to downplay it. Bit long, yeah? But I slept through most of it. Anyway, this place looks mad. Where's my room? I'm gonna dump my stuff and then check out the rest of the station if that's cool with you." I blinked all three of my eyes in sequence, which is what my species does when we are processing unexpected information. Well, yes, we do have an orientation schedule prepared. There are safety briefings, cultural sensitivity workshops, a tour of the academic facilities, meetings with your academic advisor, and then we have scheduled a welcome dinner with the other exchange students, which will give you time to acclimate before you, as you say, check out the station. Flynn laughed, and it was the kind of laugh that suggested he thought the entire concept of scheduled orientation was hilarious. "Yeah, nah. Orientations are a bit boring, yeah. How about you just point me in the right direction and I'll figure it out as I go. That's how we do things back home. Besides, I'm not gonna learn anything sitting in a lecture hall that I won't learn better by just walking around and talking to people, right?" This was not protocol. This was the opposite of protocol. Protocol was my life. Protocol was what kept 3,000 students from different species, with different biologies, different cultural norms, and different environmental requirements. From accidentally killing each other or starting interstellar incidents, protocol was sacred. Mr. O'Reilly, I began, using my most authoritative administrator voice, the one I reserve for students who think rules are merely suggestions. The orientation process exists for your safety and the safety of others. There are sections of this station that are not compatible with human biology. There are species whose cultural practices might seem offensive without proper context. There are emergency procedures you need to understand. Surely you can appreciate the importance of being properly informed. Flynn grinned at me, and it was the kind of grin that made me deeply, profoundly nervous. Mate, I grew up in a country where half the animals can kill you. The sun is actively trying to give you cancer, and the ocean is full of things that want to eat you or sting you or both. I reckon I can handle a space station. But hey, if it makes you feel better, how about you walk with me and tell me the important stuff as we go? That way I get the info, you get to tick your boxes, and we both win. Sound good? And that, right there, should have been my first warning sign. Because Flynn O'Reilly from Australia was not just a student, he was a force of nature wrapped in casual confidence and an accent that made everything sound either like a joke or a threat, and sometimes both at the same time. I looked at him, at his completely inappropriate clothing, at his battered bag, at his grin that suggested he had never met a rule he could not bend, and I made a decision that I would come to regret approximately 47 times over the next several weeks. Very well, I said, and I started walking toward the residential sector, already composing my resignation letter in my head. Flynn fell into step beside me, completely unbothered by the fact that he was on an alien space station millions of kilometers from his home planet, and said, "So, what's the food like here? Please tell me you've got something better than space paste, because the stuff on the transport tasted like someone liquefied sadness and called it nutrition." I glanced at him. "That is exactly what our nutrient paste tastes like, yes." He laughed again. "Brilliant. This is gonna be fun." "No, Flynn. No, it was not." The tour started going wrong approximately 4 minutes after we left the docking bay, which I am fairly certain is some kind of record. We were walking through the main concourse, which is this beautiful open area with bioluminescent panels on the ceiling that cycle through the day and night patterns of various homeworlds. Very calming, very peaceful, when Flynn stopped dead in his tracks and pointed at one of the maintenance alcoves. "Oi, what's that little guy doing there?" he asked. And before I could stop him, before I could even process what was happening, he was walking toward the alcove with his hand extended. "Mr. O'Reilly, wait," I called out, my voice hitting a pitch that I did not know I was capable of producing. "That is a Zarthian tunnel spider. They are highly venomous and extremely aggressive when approached by unknown species. Please step back immediately." Flynn, and I cannot stress this enough, did not step back. He crouched down, getting even closer to the creature, which was about the size of a human hand and covered in bristling purple hairs that secreted a neurotoxin capable of paralyzing most species within seconds. "Nah, he's all right," Flynn said cheerfully. "Just a little spider. Yeah? Look at him. He's more scared of me than I am of him." "That is not how fear works," I practically shouted, already reaching for my emergency communicator. "That is not how any of this works." The spider, clearly as confused as I was, reared up on its back legs in what is universally recognized as a threat display. Its fangs, which dripped with venom, extended to their full length. Any reasonable being would have run. Any sane being would have called for help. Flynn O'Reilly, from Australia, leaned in closer and said, "Yeah, you're a feisty one, aren't you? Reminds me of the huntsman that lived in my bathroom back home. We called him Gerald. Good bloke. Kept the mosquitoes down." The spider, perhaps realizing that it had encountered something fundamentally wrong with the natural order of the universe, slowly lowered itself back down and scuttled away into the ventilation system. Flynn stood up, dusted off his hands, and turned to me with a smile. "See? No worries, mate. Just gotta show him you're not a threat." I stared at him. All three of my eyes were open as wide as they could go. My respiratory system was working overtime. That it could have killed you." "Yeah, nah," Flynn said, which I was learning meant the exact opposite of what it sounded like it meant. "I've been bitten by redbacks, white tails, and one time a Sydney funnel web got into my shoe. Still here, aren't I? That little guy didn't even look that dangerous compared to what we've got back home." This was my life now. This was what I had chosen. We continued the tour, and I tried very hard to keep Flynn away from anything that could kill him. which on a space station housing 247 different species was essentially everything. We passed a group of thoraxian students, who are these massive insectoid beings that stand about 2.5 meters tall with mandibles that can crush steel, and they are generally considered quite intimidating. Flynn waved at them and called out, "G'day lad," like he was greeting neighbors over a fence. One of the thoraxians clicked its mandibles in surprise. "The human is very small," it said to its companion in thoraxian, which I can understand but Flynn presumably could not. "And yet it shows no fear response. Is it defective?" "I can hear you, mate," Flynn called back cheerfully. "And nah, not defective. Just Australian. We grow up around things that want to kill us, so you lot seem pretty chill by comparison." The thoraxians looked at each other, then at Flynn, then hurried away down the corridor, which was absolutely not the response I had anticipated. Species that consider themselves apex predators do not typically flee from beings 1/3 their size, and yet here we were. By the time we reached the science wing, I had already sent 3 emergency messages to station security and 1 very panicked note to my supervisor explaining that the human was going to give me a stress-induced molt. We were passing by one of the xenobiology labs when the door slid open and out stepped Pelmara, our head science officer, who is a Vanlari and has this very calm, very methodical approach to everything. She has 6 manipulator arms, soft purple skin and a voice like wind chimes, very soothing under normal circumstances. "Vextel," she said, nodding at me, then her eye stalks swiveled to focus on Flynn. "And this must be our human exchange student. Welcome to the station, Mr. O'Reilly. I have been very much looking forward to meeting you. Your species biology is fascinating." Flynn grinned. "Yeah? What's so fascinating about us then?" Pelmara's eye stalks waved enthusiastically, which is how her species shows excitement. "Well, for starters, your planet's environment is remarkably hostile. The radiation levels, the abundance of venomous species, the extreme weather patterns. It is quite remarkable that you evolved to sentience at all. Most species that develop on Deathworlds do not survive long enough to achieve spaceflight." "Deathworld?" Flynn laughed. "That's a bit dramatic, yeah. I mean, sure, Australia's got some gnarly stuff, but you just gotta be smart about it." Before Pelmara could respond, the security channel on my communicator crackled to life and a very irritated voice said, "Vextel, why am I receiving reports that a human is attempting to pet a Zarthian tunnel spider and intimidating a group of thoraxians? Please tell me this is not the exchange student." I closed my eyes, which did nothing to block out the reality of my situation. "That is indeed the exchange student, Chief Krathner. I am coming to your location now," Krathner said, and he did not sound happy. "Do not let the human touch anything else." Krathner arrived approximately 90 seconds later, moving at a speed that suggested he thought Flynn was an active threat to station security. Krathner is a Dravosian, which means he is built like a tank crossed with a boulder, standing 2 meters tall and covered in armored plates that can withstand small arms fire. He has 4 eyes, all of which were currently focused on Flynn with what I can only describe as deep suspicion. "You are the human," Krathner said, and it was not a question. Flynn looked up at him, and I expected fear, or at least a healthy sense of caution. Instead, Flynn's face lit up. "Wow, you're a big fella, aren't ya? What species are you? You look like you could bench press a shuttle." Krathner's armored plates shifted slightly, which is what happens when a Dravosian is caught off guard. "I am Dravosian. I am Chief of Station Security. I have received multiple reports of you engaging in unsafe behavior." "Unsafe?" Flynn frowned. "Mate, I just said good day to a spider and some bug guys. How's that unsafe?" "The spider is venomous," Krathner said slowly, like he was explaining something to a particularly dim child. "The thoraxians are from a warrior culture. You should not approach either without proper safety protocols." Flynn shrugged. "Look, I appreciate the concern, yeah? But back home I've got spiders living in my house that could drop a cow. I've swum in water with box jellyfish, which are practically invisible and can kill you in minutes. I've walked past crocodiles that could bite a person in half, a little spider and some big guys with mandibles. That's nothing, mate. That's Tuesday." The silence that followed was profound. Pelmara's eye stalks had frozen in mid-wave. Krathner's armored plates had stopped shifting entirely. I felt my primary heart skip a beat, which is never a good sign. "Your planet," Pelmara said quietly, "has spiders that can kill bovine-sized creatures, and jellyfish that are invisible and lethal, and reptilian predators capable of bisecting sapient beings." "Well, yeah," Flynn said, Like this was completely normal information. Plus we've got snakes, sharks, drop bears if you're not careful, blue-ringed octopuses, stonefish, funnel web spiders, magpies during swooping season, cassowaries if you get too close, and the sun is constantly trying to murder you because the ozone layer's got holes in it. Oh, and everything in the ocean either wants to eat you, sting you, or poison you, and sometimes all three. You learn to be pretty chill about danger when literally everything around you is potentially deadly. Krofner looked at me. Vextel, did your briefing materials mention any of this? No, I said weakly. No, they did not. After the disaster that was the orientation tour, I made the executive decision to take Flynn directly to the cafeteria, because at least food could not possibly cause an interstellar incident. This was, in retrospect, incredibly naive of me, but in my defense I had already used up my entire weekly allotment of panic and needed a break. The cafeteria on the station is actually quite nice, all things considered. It serves cuisine from 43 different worlds, accommodates 17 different atmosphere requirements, and has only had 3 minor poisoning incidents in the past cycle, which is well below the galactic average. Flynn walked in, looked around at the various food dispensers and cultural eating areas and said, "Huh, this is pretty fancy. Where's the good stuff?" "The good stuff is subjective based on your species' dietary requirements," I explained, gesturing to the human-compatible section. "Your file indicates you are an omnivore with a preference for high protein and carbohydrate intake. The dispensers in Section 7 should provide adequate nutrition." Flynn walked over to Section 7, examined the options, and his face did something complicated. "Right, so, I've got reconstituted protein blocks, synthetic vegetable matter, and something called NutriPaste Extreme. Is this what humans are supposed to eat in space?" "It meets all nutritional requirements as specified by Terran medical standards," I said defensively. "Yeah, nah. This looks like what I'd feed my dog if I hated him," Flynn muttered, but he grabbed a tray anyway and loaded it up with items that looked vaguely edible. We sat down at one of the communal tables, which was currently occupied by a nervous-looking culinary student named Tibix, who is about half Flynn's size and has these large reflective eyes that make him look perpetually startled. Tibix looked up as we approached, saw Flynn, and immediately started to gather his things. "I apologize. I did not mean to intrude on your meal. I will relocate to another table." "Nah. Mate, you're good," Flynn said, sitting down across from him with zero regard for personal space protocols. "I'm Flynn. Just got here today. What's your name?" "I am Tibix of the Culinary Holdings," Tibix said quietly, his translator making his voice sound like whispered wind. "I am a first cycle student studying xenobotany." "Plants, yeah? That's pretty cool." Flynn started eating his protein block, made a face that suggested he was reconsidering every life choice that had led him to this moment, and then kept eating anyway. "So what's the food like on your homeworld? Better than this, I hope?" Tebix's eyes brightened slightly. "Oh yes. My world has the most wonderful fungal gardens. We cultivate over 6,000 varieties and many of them are bioluminescent. Do you have fungi on Earth?" "Heaps of them," Flynn said enthusiastically. "We eat mushrooms all the time. Course some of them will kill you dead if you pick the wrong ones, but that's half the fun, yeah? Learning which ones are safe." I watched Tibix's expression shift from nervous to confused. "Your species consumes potentially lethal organisms for enjoyment?" "Well, when you put it like that, it sounds bad," Flynn said, laughing. "But now we eat heaps of stuff that could be dangerous if you're not careful. Pufferfish, which has this toxin that'll paralyze you. Cassava, which has cyanide in it if you don't prepare it right. Elderberries, rhubarb leaves, some kinds of beans. Oh, and we drink ethanol for fun, which is literally a poison, but in small amounts it just makes you feel good and do stupid things." The cafeteria had gone quiet. I had not noticed it happening, but apparently Flynn's voice carries quite well, and several nearby tables had stopped eating to listen to this absolutely unhinged description of human cuisine. A Xanthari student from 3 tables over called out, "Did you say your species voluntarily consumes cyanide?" Flynn turned around, completely unbothered by the attention. "Yeah, but only a little bit. And you cook it out first, mostly. It's fine, humans have pretty robust digestive systems. We can eat stuff that would put most species in medical bay." "This is not normal," someone else shouted, and I could not even tell which species it was because my vision was starting to blur from stress. "Sure it is," Flynn said cheerfully. "Look, when you grow up in a country where the wildlife is constantly trying to kill you, you get pretty good at figuring out what's actually dangerous versus what just looks dangerous. I've been bitten by snakes 4 times, stung by jellyfish twice, Attacked by a magpie during nesting season more times than I can count, and one time a spider bit me on the face while I was sleeping. Still here, still kicking, still eating questionable food. Tibix made a small squeaking sound. A venomous arthropod bit your facial area while you were unconscious? Yeah, woke up looking like I'd gone 3 rounds with a boxer. Face all swollen and purple. Mum took one look at me and said I'd probably be fine, just put some ice on it. She was right too. Cleared up in a few days. Your maternal parent did not seek immediate medical intervention? Tibix's eyes were now so wide I was worried they might fall out of his head. Nah, she's from the bush. She's seen worse. You don't go to hospital every time something bites you in Australia, or you'd never leave the hospital. You just check if it was something proper deadly, and if it wasn't, you get on with your day. I put my head in my manipulators, which is the vexillary equivalent of giving up on life. Around us, students were staring at Flynn with expressions ranging from horror to morbid fascination. A few had stopped eating entirely. So what do you lot eat? Flynn asked the table at large, apparently oblivious to the fact that he had just traumatized half the cafeteria. Anything interesting? A brave Morphidian student 2 tables over raised a tentacle hesitantly. I consume processed algae supplements that provide optimal nutrition with minimal digestive stress. That sounds boring as hell, Flynn said, not unkindly. You ever tried just, I don't know, eating something because it tastes good rather than because it's optimal? Taste enjoyment is secondary to nutritional efficiency. The Morphidian responded, sounding confused. Flynn shook his head. See, that's the difference, yeah? Life's too short to eat boring food. Back home we've got meat pies, fish and chips, Tim Tams, Vegemite, Pavlova, Lamingtons, all kinds of good stuff. Sure, some of it'll clog your arteries and probably shave a few years off your life, but at least you enjoyed the trip. Tibix was looking at Flynn with something approaching awe. You are either the bravest being I have ever met, or the most foolish, and I cannot determine which. Flynn grinned at him. Bit of both, probably. That's the Australian way, mate. She'll be right. I do not know what that phrase means, Tibix said quietly. It means everything will work out fine, probably, maybe, and if it doesn't, well, at least you gave it a go. I looked at Tibix, who despite his nervousness seemed to be warming up to Flynn's completely unhinged approach to existence. I looked at the other students, who were now whispering among themselves about the human who drank poison for fun and got bitten by deadly creatures as a hobby. I looked at Flynn, who was happily eating his terrible protein block and chatting with Tibix about the difference between earth fungi and culinary fungi like he had not just caused a minor panic in the cafeteria, and I realized, with a sinking feeling in both my hearts, that Flynn O'Reilly was going to become a legend on this station, and I was going to have to file so much paperwork about it. The next morning I received a message from combat instructor Zalthor requesting that I personally escort Flynn to the mandatory self-defense training session. The message was very polite, very professional, and had an underlying tone of please make sure the human does not accidentally kill anyone, which I found both reasonable and deeply concerning. Self-defense training is required for all students because despite our best efforts at maintaining a peaceful academic environment, the galaxy is a dangerous place and students need to know how to protect themselves. The classes are taught by Zalthor, a Kregani warrior who has approximately 40 cycles of combat experience and takes his job very seriously. Too seriously, some might say, but nobody says that to his face because he is 2.3 meters of pure muscle and bad attitude. I collected Flynn from his quarters where he answered the door wearing shorts and a shirt that said no worries across the front, which seemed deeply inappropriate for combat training but was apparently all he had brought. We walked to the training hall in silence, mostly because I was trying to figure out how to explain to Zalthor that humans might be more fragile than they look and please do not accidentally break our exchange student. We entered the training hall to find about 30 students already assembled, all wearing proper protective gear and looking nervous. Zalthor stood at the front, arms crossed, looking like he could punch through a bulkhead if it annoyed him sufficiently. You are late, Zalthor said, his voice like grinding stone. Sorry, mate. My fault, Flynn said cheerfully, walking right up to Zalthor without any apparent sense of self-preservation. I'm Flynn, the new human student. This is my first combat class. So go easy on me, yeah? Zalthor looked down at Flynn, then at me, then back at Flynn. I do not go easy. Combat is not easy. If you wish to survive in the galaxy, you must be prepared for violence. Do you understand, human? Yeah, nah, totally get it, Flynn said. So what are we learning today? Zalthor gestured to the center of the training mat. Today we practice defensive stances and threat assessment. When faced with a potential attacker, You must first evaluate the danger level and position yourself appropriately. Observe. He called up one of the students, a Dravosan built almost as solidly as Crathenir, and demonstrated a proper defensive stance. Low center of gravity protected vital areas, maximum stability. Very textbook. Very effective. Now, Zalthor said, the human will demonstrate. Flynn walked onto the mat, and I prepared myself for disaster. Zalthor circled him slowly, explaining the proper foot placement, the angle of the arms, the distribution of weight. Flynn listened politely, nodded in all the right places, and then when Zalthor said, "Show me your stance," Flynn dropped into a position that was absolutely nothing like what had just been demonstrated. His weight was forward, not back. His hands were loose at his sides, not raised protectively. He looked relaxed, almost casual, like he was waiting for a bus rather than preparing for combat. "That is incorrect," Zalthor said flatly. "You are completely exposed. Any attacker could strike your vital areas with ease." "Yeah, but I can move faster from here," Flynn said. "If I'm all locked up in a defensive stance, I can't react quick enough. Gotta be able to dodge, yeah?" Zalthor's eyes narrowed. "Demonstrate." What happened next occurred so quickly that several students later claimed they had not seen it at all. Zalthor, moving with the speed that comes from 40 cycles of combat training, threw a controlled strike at Flynn's center mass. It was not a real attack, just a test, but it was fast enough that most students would not have reacted in time. Flynn moved, not away, which would have been the logical response, but to the side and slightly forward, letting Zalthor's arm pass centimeters from his torso. In the same motion, Flynn's hand came up and tapped Zalthor's extended elbow joint, the weak point in Kragani armor plating, and then he stepped back to his original position. All in less than 2 seconds. The training hall went dead silent. Zalthor stood frozen, his arms still extended, staring at the spot where Flynn had been. "How did you do that?" Flynn shrugged. "Reflexes, I guess. When you grow up around snakes and spiders and drop bears, you get pretty good at moving fast. Something comes at you, you don't think. You just react. It's like muscle memory." "Yeah, drop bears?" someone whispered from the back of the class. "Yeah, they're these things that drop out of trees onto your head," Flynn explained casually. "Real nasty if you're not paying attention. Had one land on my uncle once, tore his shirt right off. You learn to watch the trees and move quick." Zalthor slowly lowered his arm, and I could see him recalibrating his entire assessment of human combat capabilities. "Again," he said, and this time when he struck, he was not holding back quite as much. Flynn dodged again, this time adding a little spin that put him behind Zalthor's guard. "See, the thing about Australian wildlife," he said conversationally while dancing around strikes that could have seriously injured him, "is that it teaches you to use your environment. Everything's a weapon if you're creative enough." "Elaborate," Zalthor demanded, breathing slightly harder now. Flynn stopped moving and looked around the training hall. "Right. So say I'm in a fight and I don't have any proper weapons, yeah? Well, I've got my shirt, which I can use to whip or tangle someone up. I've got my shoes, which make decent projectiles or clubs if I take them off. That water bottle over there? Good for throwing or hitting. That chair? Even better. The training mats? I can roll them up and use them like a staff or trip someone with them. That light fixture? If I can reach it, I can pull it down. Even dirt or sand, you throw that in someone's eyes and they can't see." The class was staring at him like he had just suggested weaponizing the air itself. "Back home," Flynn continued, "we had this guy who fought off a crocodile with a folding chair. Another bloke took on a shark with a boogie board. My dad once scared off a brown snake with a thong." "A thong?" Tibbix asked quietly from the side of the mat where he was watching with the other students. "Yeah. A flip-flop, sandal, whatever you call them. Threw it at the snake's head. Snake decided it had better places to be. Point is, you don't need fancy weapons if you know how to use what's around you." Zalthor was looking at Flynn with an expression I had never seen on his face before, something between respect and confusion. "Your planet trained you in improvised combat techniques from childhood?" "Nah, not trained exactly," Flynn said. "More like we all just learned to survive by figuring out what works. Australia's not the kind of place where you can rely on always having the right tool for the job, so you learn to make do with what you've got. My grandpa used to say any tool's the right tool if you're creative enough, and he once fixed a car engine with a coat hanger and chewing gum, so I reckon he knew what he was talking about." Zalthor turned to address the entire class. "Change of lesson plan. The human will now demonstrate improvised weapon techniques. All students pay attention. This may save your lives one day." And that is how Flynn O'Reilly from Australia ended up teaching a combat class to a hall full of alien students, showing them how to turn everyday objects into weapons while casually mentioning that he had learned these skills by avoiding being eaten, stung, bitten, or otherwise killed by his home continent's wildlife. I sat in the corner and updated my resignation letter, adding several new paragraphs about how this job was affecting my health and well-being. Tibbik sat next to me watching Flynn demonstrate how to use a tail as both a whip and a restraint device, and whispered, "He is the most terrifying being I have ever met, and yet I cannot help but admire him." That, I said tiredly, is exactly the problem. 3 days after the combat training incident, which was still being discussed in hushed whispers throughout the station, the environmental systems experienced what the maintenance crew classified as a critical temperature fluctuation event. In less technical terms, the heating system malfunctioned and the station temperature dropped from a comfortable 15 degrees Celsius to approximately 5 degrees Celsius in the span of 20 minutes. This was, to be extremely clear, a serious emergency. Most species on the station are adapted to temperate or warm climates. 5 degrees is cold enough to cause hypothermia in Quilnari, metabolic shutdown in Vinlari, and general misery in just about everyone else. Emergency alerts went out across all channels. Students were instructed to return to their climate-controlled quarters immediately. The maintenance teams were scrambling to fix the heating arrays. It was chaos. I was in my office, bundled in 3 thermal wraps and still shivering when my communicator chimed. It was Krothamir, and he sounded even more irritated than usual. Vextel, why is the human walking through the main concourse in shorts? I blinked, which did nothing to help my comprehension. I'm sorry, what? The human Flynn O'Reilly is currently strolling through the main concourse wearing shorts and a thin shirt, drinking something from the cafeteria, and appears to be completely unaffected by the temperature drop. Multiple students have reported seeing him and are now concerned that they are hallucinating from cold exposure. I pulled up the security feed on my data slate and sure enough, there was Flynn, walking casually through the concourse like it was a pleasant spring day. As I watched, he stopped to examine one of the bioluminescent panels, took a sip of his drink, and waved at a group of Zenfari students who were huddled together for warmth and staring at him like he was a thermal anomaly made flesh. I will address this immediately, I said, grabbing my 4th thermal wrap and heading for the door. I found Flynn, approximately 5 minutes later, still wandering around, now looking at the station directory like he was planning his next destination. "Mr. O'Reilly," I called out, my voice muffled by the thermal wrap covering half my face. "Are you not cold?" He turned around, saw me bundled up like I was preparing for Arctic exploration, and grinned. "Cold? Nah, mate. This is lovely. Feels like a nice winter morning back home. Bit crisp, yeah, but nothing too bad. Why? Are you cold?" "The station temperature has dropped to 5 degrees Celsius," I said, trying to keep my teeth from chattering. "This is a critical emergency. You should be in your quarters where the individual climate controls can keep you warm." Flynn looked genuinely confused. 5 degrees? That's nothing. Back in Melbourne we get days where it drops to 0 or below, and people still go out for their morning jogs. This is actually pretty comfortable. He gestured to his outfit, which consisted of shorts and a thin cotton shirt. Plus, it's way better than the heat. I can handle cold, no worries, but heat, that'll kill you if you're not careful. Your species can survive in 0-degree temperatures wearing minimal clothing. I asked, because apparently my education on human biology was severely lacking. Well, I wouldn't want to stay out in it for hours, yeah? But for walking around a bit? Sure, no problem. Humans are pretty adaptable to temperature changes. We've got people living in the Arctic where it gets to -40, and people living in deserts where it hits +50. We just sort of deal with it. Before I could respond, the station-wide announcement system crackled to life. "Attention all students and staff. Secondary environmental alert. Atmospheric filters in sections 4 through 7 are experiencing elevated carbon dioxide levels. Please evacuate these sections immediately and proceed to safe zones until the issue is resolved." Flynn and I happened to be standing in section 5. "Right, we should move," I said, already heading toward the exit. I made it about 10 meters before I realized Flynn was not following me. I turned around to find him standing in the middle of the corridor taking deep breaths. "You coming, mate?" he asked. "The carbon dioxide levels are rising," I said, my voice approaching panic levels. "Prolonged exposure can cause respiratory distress, cognitive impairment and eventual unconsciousness." "Yeah, but it's not that bad yet, is it?" Flynn took another deep breath. Actually smells kind of fresh, like after a good rain back home. What's the CO2 level at? I checked my data slate. Approaching 1200 parts per million and rising. Oh, that's nothing, Flynn said cheerfully. Earth's atmosphere has been sitting at around 400 parts per million for ages, and in cities or closed spaces it can hit over 1,000 easy. I've been in packed pubs where it probably got to 2,000 and everyone was fine, just a bit sleepy and giggly. This is actually pretty comfortable. I stared at him. Your planet's baseline atmospheric composition includes elevated carbon dioxide levels that would be considered toxic to most species. Well, when you put it like that it sounds bad, Flynn said. But nah, we're used to it. Plus, with the ozone layer being dodgy and all the pollution, we're kind of adapted to breathing air that's not exactly pristine. Builds character, yeah? At this point, Pilmara's voice came through my communicator. Vextel, I am monitoring the human's vital signs remotely as requested, and I am detecting no signs of distress despite his presence in the affected zone. His respiratory rate is normal, his heart rate is stable, and his core temperature is actually slightly elevated, which suggests his metabolism is compensating for the cold efficiently. This is remarkable. It's really not, I muttered, but I gestured for Flynn to follow me anyway because even if he was apparently immune to environmental hazards, I certainly was not. As we walked toward the safe zone, we passed groups of students who had evacuated and were now warming themselves with thermal blankets. They stared at Flynn, who was still in shorts, still completely comfortable, still sipping his drink like he was on vacation. Is that the human? Someone whispered. I heard he walked through the cold zone without protection, another voice said. I heard he breathed the toxic air and said it smelled nice. A third added. My roommate said he comes from a death world where everything tries to kill you and the sky itself is poisonous, came another whisper. Flynn, hearing this, turned and called out, the sky's not poisonous, mate. It's just got a bit less ozone than it should, so you gotta wear sunscreen or you'll get skin cancer. Totally different thing. This did not have the reassuring effect I think he was hoping for. If anything, the students looked more horrified. By the time we reached safe zone, word had spread throughout the entire station. The human could survive freezing temperatures and minimal clothing. The human could breathe toxic atmospheres and find them refreshing. The human came from a planet where the sun actively tried to give you cancer and you just put on lotion and went about your day. Tibbix found us in the safe zone and approached Flynn with his usual nervous energy. Flynn, is it true your planet's sun is dangerous? Oh yeah, Flynn said casually. UV radiation's pretty intense because of the ozone holes. You go out in the Australian summer without protection, you'll be burnt to a crisp in about 15 minutes. That's why we've got the highest rates of skin cancer in the world, but you just slip, slop, slap and she'll be right. I do not know what those words mean, Tibbix said quietly. Slip on a shirt, slop on sunscreen, slap on a hat. Flynn explained. It's what they teach kids so they don't get cooked by the sun. Pretty simple. Really. Tibbix looked at me. Vextal, I am beginning to understand why humans were able to achieve spaceflight. They had to escape their own planet before it killed them. That, I said, watching Flynn chat happily with a group of students who were treating him like some kind of environmental survival expert, is probably the most accurate assessment of humanity I have heard yet. The heating systems were repaired within the hour, and the atmospheric filters were back to normal shortly after. Flynn never once retreated to his climate-controlled quarters. He just walked around completely comfortable, while the rest of us suffered and wondered how his species had managed to survive long enough to develop sentience. The legend of the Australian human continued to grow. It has now been 4 weeks since Flynn O'Reilly arrived at the Galactic Academy orbital station, and I am writing my official report on the human exchange program with trembling manipulators and what I suspect is a stress-induced ulcer. In the interest of complete honesty, I must state the following. Flynn has not violated any actual station regulations. He has attended all his classes, maintained passing grades, and has not caused any injuries or diplomatic incidents that require formal documentation. By every official metric, he has been a model student. However, I am recommending that all future human exchange students come with comprehensive warning labels, detailed environmental tolerance documentation, and perhaps a psychological preparation course for the staff who will be supervising them. Flynn has somehow become the most popular student on the station. Tibbix follows him around like a devoted apprentice, learning what Flynn calls the Australian approach to life, which seems to involve assuming everything will probably be fine and dealing with problems as they arise rather than preventing them in the first place. The combat training classes are now twice as popular because students want to learn improvised weapon techniques. 3 different species have asked for samples of Earth wildlife documentation because they refuse to believe his stories without visual evidence. Crathnir has stopped sending me concerned messages and has instead started joining Flynn for what they call morning walks, where they discuss comparative threat assessment between their respective homeworlds. Pelmara has written 6 research papers on human adaptability and is petitioning for a full Earth biology research expedition. As for me, I have learned that humans are not just survivors. They are survivors from a planet that actively tried to kill them at every opportunity, and they responded by developing immunity to poison, tolerance for extreme environments, and the ability to turn literally anything into a weapon. They drank toxins for fun, ate potentially lethal food as cuisine, and considered being bitten by venomous creatures a normal part of childhood. And Flynn, bless his completely unhinged Australian soul, thinks all of this is completely normal. My final assessment is this: humans are terrifying, adaptable, and far too casual about danger. Their planet is a death world that makes most hostile environments look like vacation destinations. And yet, despite all of this, or perhaps because of it, they are some of the most friendly, optimistic, and genuinely kind beings I have ever encountered. I am not resigning. I am, however, requesting a significant raise and a lengthy vacation. Flynn O'Reilly leaves next week to return to Earth. The station will be quieter without him. Safer, certainly. More predictable, absolutely. But I suspect we will all miss the human who taught us that survival is not just about avoiding danger, but about facing it with a smile and saying she'll be right, even if we still have no idea what that actually means. Report filed by Vextel, Senior Administrator of Student Integration, Galactic Academy Orbital Station. Addendum: Flynn has just informed me that he is planning to return next cycle and is bringing a friend from a place called Queensland, which he assures me is even more laid back than Melbourne. I am updating my resignation letter as a precautionary measure.